46 bishops walked into a room in the spring of 397 A.D. They carried candles and opinions and a list. The list would become the Bible, not all of it, the parts that survived. Because for every book that made the final canon, another book was reviewed, debated, and set aside. The Book of Enoch was on the list. It had been read by early Christians for 3 centuries. The Apostle Jude quoted it directly. The Ethiopian church still treats it as scripture today. By the end of that council, it was gone from Western Christianity. The church called it a theological decision, a matter of orthodoxy. But there was a woman in that city who knew the real reason, and the church spent the next 1,600 years making sure you would never learn her name. This is what they couldn't erase. Her name was Miriam. She worked with her hands, not in a field, not in a kitchen, but in a scriptorium on the eastern edge of Carthage, where the smell of fresh ink and dried leather filled the air before dawn. She copied manuscripts. That was the official word for what she did. The church permitted it barely, because literate women who would work for less than a deacon were useful. She copied psalms, epistles, letters between bishops. Clean work, careful work. Nothing that required her to think too hard about what her hands were writing. She had learned that much from her father. He was a scribe, too. When she was 12 years old, Roman soldiers came through their village looking for seditious texts. Her father did not hide his manuscripts. He burned them. Every scroll in the house, gone in one night. The smell of scorched leather stayed in her hair for a week. She asked him why he didn't bury them, hide them somewhere, save something. He said, "The only scroll that survives is the one no one knows exists." She understood. Invisible was safe. Hidden was alive. She carried that truth into adulthood the way some children carry scars, not as damage, but as instruction. So when the Council of Carthage declared in the early months of 397 A.D. that it would produce a definitive list of accepted scripture, Miriam did what her father taught her. She went quiet. She kept her head down. She copied her psalms and waited for it to be over. She had no reason to think it would concern her. She was wrong. The document fell from a deacon's satchel in the corridor outside the main hall. He didn't notice. Miriam did. She picked it up, meaning to return it. She read the first line. It was a preliminary list. Books under review for exclusion. The Book of Enoch was third from the top, marked with a small cross in the margin. The notation that meant condemned without discussion. Her hands went cold, not from fear, from recognition. She had read the Book of Enoch once, years earlier, in a private collection she was hired to catalog. She had read it the way you read something you're not supposed to, fast, in poor light, checking the door. What she remembered was not the Watchers or the Nephilim or the cosmic architecture of fallen angels. What she remembered was the voice of the text, the precision of it, the way it spoke about knowledge as something that could be kept or destroyed, passed forward or buried, and how that choice defined every generation that came after. She returned the document to the deacon's door unseen, but she went home and pulled the Book of Enoch from where she'd hidden it, wrapped in a grain sack, pressed beneath the floor tiles she'd loose laid herself. She read it again, this time slow, this time with the door locked. The copy she had was not a clean text. It was a working manuscript, margins filled with annotations, corrections, cross-references. She had assumed the notes were from the previous owner, a merchant who had acquired texts the way some men acquire debt, without grasping what he held. But somewhere in the 6th chapter, the handwriting changed. Smaller letters, a different angle, ink that had faded to brown at the edges, older, much older than the merchant's notes. Someone had annotated this manuscript long before it passed through any merchant's hands. The notes were theological, careful. They traced connections between the Book of Enoch and the Gospel of John, between the watchers of Genesis 6 and the letters of Paul. Whoever wrote them knew Scripture the way a builder knows load-bearing walls, not by memorization, but by understanding what would collapse if you removed any single piece. Miriam read the annotations twice before she noticed what was missing. There was no name, no attribution. The notes were unsigned. In a tradition where every scribe signed his work, in margins, in colophons, at the end of the final page, this manuscript had been stripped of its author. Someone had done that deliberately. She pressed her fingertip against the oldest ink. It didn't smear. This was not recent. The erasure was decades old, maybe older. A woman had written these notes. Miriam knew it the way she knew certain things without evidence. From the pressure of the letters, the narrowness of the script, the choice to write in margins rather than on separate sheets, the habit of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. Someone had erased her. And now the council was about to erase the text she had spent her life annotating. Her name was Perpetua. That was what Miriam came to call her, though she found no confirmation anywhere, only the absence of a name where a name should have been. Perpetua of the small letters, Perpetua who had read the Watchers and found not heresy, but architecture, Perpetua whose notes were the only evidence that she had ever existed. Miriam thought about her father burning his scrolls. She thought about Perpetua erasing her own name. Both had chosen invisibility as survival. Both had trusted that the text would outlast the person. Both had been wrong. The text was about to be voted out of existence. The person was already gone. She did not know what she intended to do. She went back to work. She copied her psalms. She watched the council sessions from outside the hall, through a gap in the courtyard wall where the mortar had crumbled. It was through that gap that she first saw Bishop Aurelius. He was the man who had trained her. 15 years earlier, when she arrived in Carthage and was willing to work for almost nothing, he had recognized her skill and hired her for the scriptorium he maintained. He had taught her the difference between copying and reading. He had, in his way, given her the tools that made her who she was. He was also the man whose signature appeared on the preliminary exclusion list. The cross beside the Book of Enoch was in his handwriting. She knew it. She had copied enough of his correspondence to know every habit of his pen. She told herself there was a theological reason. There were good arguments against the Book of Enoch, questions of authorship, of consistency with accepted doctrine, of the risks of texts that described angels breeding with human women in ways that complicated settled theology. She had heard these arguments. She did not dismiss them, but she also knew that Aurelius had read Perpetua's annotations. She had seen a second manuscript in his private library, a clean copy of the Book of Enoch, no marginal notes, which meant the original with Perpetua's notes had existed apart, had passed through his hands, had been seen by him. He knew someone had found the Book of Enoch worth annotating in careful theological detail. He had voted to condemn it without discussion. Marcellus found her at the wrong moment. She had been leaving the scriptorium at dusk, ink still drying on her hands, when he fell into step beside her in the courtyard. He was a presbyter from the Western District, young enough to still believe that the right argument, made at the right moment, could change a vote. He spoke without turning his face toward her. His lips barely moved. "You know what they're removing," he said. "I know. There are 4 copies in the city. Aurelius knows where 3 of them are." She kept walking. "If you have the 4th," he said, "you need to decide what to do with it before the vote." He stopped. She didn't. She was 3 streets away before she understood what he had not said, that Aurelius had located 3 copies of the Book of Enoch and was asking questions about who in the city had been working with the text. He was looking for her. She went home. She sat with the manuscript a long time without lighting a lamp. Her father's voice was clear in the dark. "The only scroll that survives is the one no one knows exists." She thought, what if that's wrong? What if the problem was never the text? What if the problem was that every person who had ever loved the text had agreed to be invisible, had annotated without signing, had copied without claiming, had hidden the scroll instead of standing behind it? What if the only reason the Book of Enoch was vulnerable now was that no one had ever put a name to what it meant to them? Perpetua had erased her own name. Her father had burned his scrolls. Miriam had kept her head down for 15 years, and in 2 days the council would vote, and the text would vanish from Western Christianity, and in 100 years there would be no record that anyone had ever fought for it. She sat with that until the lamp ran dry. She did not sleep. Before dawn, she was on the streets. The stones were wet from night rain, and her feet made no sound, a habit she had never lost. The manuscript was under her cloak, pressed against her ribs. She counted her steps the way her father had taught her, not for distance, but for focus. When her mind started to pull toward the consequences, she counted. She went to Marcellus, not to his house, to the small church in the Western District where he held his dawn prayers, because she knew he would be alone there, and because she needed a witness who could not later claim he had never seen her. She placed the manuscript on the altar, not to hide it, to record it. "I need you to copy the annotations," she said. "Not the text, the annotations. Every word in the margins, every correction. Copy them onto fresh vellum and sign your name to the copy." He looked at her. "Date it," she said. "Write today's date. Write that the annotations were made by a woman whose name was removed by persons unknown, and that this copy was made one day before the Council of Carthage voted to exclude the Book of Enoch from the Western canon. If Aurelius finds out, he'll find out," she said. "That's the point." The vote happened the next morning. The Book of Enoch was excluded from the Western biblical canon. The Council of Carthage, 397 AD, produced a list of accepted books that would form the foundation of the Western Bible as it is known today. The Book of Enoch was not on it. Miriam stood in the courtyard and watched the bishops file out. She felt the absence of the manuscript against her ribs. She had left it with Marcellus to store in the Western Church's archives with the copy of Perpetua's annotations beside it, and both their names on the outer wrapping. Marcellus as witness, and Miriam as the woman who had carried the text to him one morning before the vote, when it could still be recorded that someone had tried. The text would disappear from official use. She knew that, but disappearing from official use was not the same as being destroyed. The Ethiopian church still held the Book of Enoch as canon. Copies survived in the mountains above Axum. In monasteries the Western councils had no reach over. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in 1947 in the caves of Qumran, would confirm that the Book of Enoch had been read and preserved for centuries before the birth of Christianity, its influence on early Christian thought, documented and real. None of that was her doing, but the copy of Perpetua's annotations survived, and the record that Miriam had carried it to a witness the morning before the vote, that survived too. Not because she hid it, because she refused to. The church erased her from the official record. There is no mention of Miriam of Carthage in the proceedings of the Council of Carthage, 397 A.D. There is no mention of Perpetua. There is no mention of any woman in the deliberations around the exclusion of the Book of Enoch. But the question that Miriam refused to let die is still alive. Why was the Book of Enoch excluded? The official answer is theological. Authorship questions, doctrinal inconsistencies, a text that described the world in ways the settled church found inconvenient. Maybe. Or maybe the real answer is simpler. Maybe a text annotated and preserved and carried forward for centuries by people who refused to be invisible, people who signed their names, who stood in courtyards, who placed manuscripts on altars, was exactly the kind of text that made certain men nervous, not because of what the Watchers did, because of what the women who read about the Watchers decided to do next. The space on the list where the Book of Enoch should have been is still there. 1,600 years of Western Christian tradition, and that space has never been filled. She left it empty on purpose,